All right, so we may as well get started. So I'm just gonna, so this is just another blank site. This is sort of my notes that I've got off to the side about the kind of things that I want to go through today. So one of them is like demonstrate how to create a table using Designer. The next one, show how to configure the create screen and the item screen. So once you've created a table, you want to configure the pages to be able to edit and create items on those tables. The next one is using one of the components that we can add to one of those screens called the pipeline component. We also want to show how to configure a tab layout, which means that you can easily switch between different tabs for different tables rather than having to do it all through the Explorer sidebar. The next one is show how to configure a Kanban board, and then finally how to create a view. And then this is the table we're going to be creating. This is either a tickets table or it's a requests table, depending on which terminology you like to use. Cool. We'll get stuck straight into it. So to create a new table, you go to Designer. To get to Designer, it's the bottom right-hand button here. So you got your Explorer, you got Workflow, you got Designer. Last week we were accessing Explorer through this button. Now we're accessing Designer through this button. If you want to create a new table, it automatically brings you to the tables page. So this shows all the tables in the site. And just to make sure everything was working, I did already make one called request twos. So that the reason I named it twos was to preserve the namespace requests for when we do it in this demo. So that is something to remember, is you can't have two tables with the same name because it actually puts it into the system, and the system, obviously you can't have multiple tables with the same name. So that's something, if you want to preserve namespaces, that's quite important to have as well. And you can show in the built-in tables as well if you ever want to see what columns are on those in case you're interacting with them, maybe using SQL, or if you're doing some sort of reporting, this can be handy. But for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to just stick to these tables. So to create a new table, you press create table. Over here, we can give it a name, and we'll call it requests. And then over here, we can then select an icon that is relevant to the request. So in this case, I looked at one before, feedback, or maybe question. Here we go, question. So this one, it's like a request, matches. And then with this, finding the right icon, it's a somewhat limited series. I think there's like a couple of 2,000 or something, but still, when you're in your head, you'd think, oh, this icon's definitely in it, but then it won't be. So it's just about just looking for the right name there. And now configuring the document storage. So over here, do we want it to create a SharePoint folder every single time a request is made? And in this case, because we might be actually saving items against the request, for example, maybe images that the clients upload when they make the request or the ticket or things like that, it might be good to configure that. So what we can do, you guys will probably only have one drive. We've got a whole bunch because this is our demo tenant, so we've got access to all those teams. But I'm just adding it to the drive there, documents. I'm going to do always create a SharePoint folder when the item is created. And now it's created. So now we've got the table ready to go. This table, though, is pretty boring right now because it's got 0 columns on it. So there's no way to add any data to it. So what we can do is we can create a new column. If there's no columns in the table, you can press this button. But if there is columns in the table, then you can create a column up in the left here. So we can create a new column. So someone's entering a ticket, like a support ticket or a request. The way they would enter this is maybe they're in Rapid themselves, or maybe they're going to be entering it in a form online, like an RP form. And what we're going to do is next week, we're actually going to build the RP form for this request table so people can add requests through like a QR code form kind of thing. But the purpose of this is to create the data structure first. So what's one of the columns? Well, we might want to know the first name. So who is actually the requester? First name. And we can leave this as a single line of text. A single line of text is what you expect it to be. It's just up to, I think it's like 250 characters. And you can just put in text there. Default value, we don't need to worry about that. We don't need to worry about hyperlink template or hyperlink label template. And then the description, I actually like putting these in just for good practice. And so maybe the first name of the requestor. There we go. And then we can save. I'm just going to do save for now. And that brings us back to this page. And we can see that the system's automatically created a system column name for it, which is first underscore name. And that just means that that's what it's called in the system. But then the title, so the user-facing title is going to be first space name there. And these are just things, if you're starting to get into the analytics side of things, these will come in handy to know. So the next thing, okay, let's create another column. This one, again, we can do last name. Let's keep it capitalized, last name. I can just tab through all of these because it's all going to be the same. And this is the last name of the requester. And then now I'm going to press save and add another, because if I know I'm going to add a whole bunch of columns, it's quicker just doing it this way. So it adds the column straight away. And now I can do my next one. So this next one, I'm going to do full name. So this isn't going to be one that's going to show up on the form or the create screen. This is going to be a system generated field where it grabs the first name and it grabs the last name and concatenates them together into a full name. And so this one is going to be a subquery. And we don't need to go too complex on how SQL works, but these are just SQL subqueries. And I've already written the subquery here. So I'm just going to paste this one in and say, yeah, did you have a question? Sorry.
No, that makes sense. It's easy.
Yeah, cool. And then so this one's just concat first name. And remember I was talking about the system labels. So we want to use those in the subquery and the last name. And then this is important. So what do we want to display this as? We want to display it as a single line of text. And we've got nothing to test it with at the moment because there's no items in the table yet. But then we can just say the system generated full name of the requester. Great. And then I might hit save there. And I'm just wondering, now I'll finish doing all the columns and then we can go back and test it because I have to create the page definition to be able to do that. And that's the next step.
Quick question about the subquery is that restricted to within this table or can you query other tables?
So you can query other tables. This one at the moment, it's the reason why it knows this first name is because we're in the subquery itself. But if you want to do select statements or whatnot that go to other tables, you can. This one, it does come with a big warning here because obviously if you put in a query that's not the best query, you might put a lot of load onto your server, especially if you're going through a whole bunch of different tables and trying to do pretty complex operations. So yeah, obviously if you're just querying the one, if you're just doing columns from the same table, it's going to be fine. But if you're doing more complex queries, you can, with the proviso of if you do it too crazy, you might crash your system.
Yeah. And just to add to that, people very commonly use it for aggregation. So number of tasks against the project or aggregating the budgets against the project or anything like that. So any logic that you can do in SQL, you can put into this box. But Tristan's exactly right with the yellow box. So our biggest client probably has hundreds of these subqueries scattered across tens of tables with no regard about efficiency of those subqueries. And so it's a dangerous toy that you can play with that if you play irresponsibly, you will slowly start to churn your server down. But again, I don't think you guys are going to be writing queries that are this long to do super complex stuff. So yeah, this is definitely a good tool to use for those aggregations.
Definitely keep it in mind though, if it's something that comes up,
It's nifty.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So
it's never a problem until it becomes a problem, right?
That is exactly it. It's not a problem until it's a problem.
Cool. So we'll go on to the next one. So this one's going to be email, and we got an email column, and then this is the email of the requester. Save and add another description. This one can just be a single line of text, a description of the request. Save and add another additional details. Now this one I might do a multiple lines of text for this one. And so what multiple lines of text means is obviously you can do multiple lines, you can style it, you can make things bold, you can even put images in it and a multiple line of text can hold up to, this is not recommended, but technically they can hold up to 2 gigabytes of information. Not that you'd ever do that, but it's just, yeah, please don't, because that would take a long time for that item to load if you're opening it up. A detailed description of the request. Save and add another request number. So request number. So in a lot of systems, you might have like a ticket number or a request number. And so I'm going to use the subquery again to be able to generate a ticket number. And say that's just going to be using just this bit of SQL here, which is just a format. And so what it's doing is it's grabbing the ID of the request. So what we would expect it to spit out for the first request is all these zeros, and then this last 0 will be replaced with the number 1, because that's its ID is 1, because it's the first request. The second request will be all the zeros, and the last one will be replaced with the 2. And then as soon as you get to 2-digit numbers, it'll obviously replace the last 2 zeros with, if you're at 10, it'll be the last 2 will be 1 and 0. And so that's just a good way to keep sort of IDs and sort of a request number, and you can attach those onto any sort of system generated emails or in any sort of correspondence or printouts, or even I generally like to use it on the actual request on the table itself, because I think it looks a little bit nicer.
Now, you've got there t.ids, obviously referencing the table ID. Is that standardized across all of your tables? Or is
if you do T, so if in any subquery, if you do T, it just means this table.
Yep, cool, okay.
Description, a
Are
system.
there any other columns that are documented somewhere in like a schema or model layout that we can see, like created by, created date, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so those are the system columns. So let me just save this. And then say if we go show built-in columns, that will have all of your built-in columns here as well. So obviously when you, created by is going to be whatever user, it's going to chuck their ID in there. Created date and time will just give you the ISO string. And you got a whole bunch of other ones.
Yeah, that's cool.
Great, request number. And then we might do a status as well. Status, choice. So new, reviewed, in progress, resolved, and canceled. And so each of these, you can actually give them a color as well, so that when you're selecting them in the choice fields, they have a color next to them. And then say, I might just leave new as this one, reviewed. We might just do as a, like a more orangey type. In progress, a bit more of a yellow. Resolved, a bit more of a green. And then canceled, we can do it as a red. And then there we go. And then the description of this is the status of the request. Then we can save that. Ooh. And then we also want to do a title column. And this can be a subquery. And this is going to combine our other 2 subqueries. So this one, I'm going to use this as the title column. And so what we're going to expect to see here is it's going to be the ID of the request, and then a dash, and then the description of the request. And so that can be our title column, and it'll look a bit nicer. And then to set it as a title column, you just do set this column to be the title column. And then we want it to be a single line of text in the description, a system generated title column from the request ID and the request system, the request description. Great. So now we've got our table. Our table's created now. And now the next thing we want to do is we actually want to start designing the page layout. So what is it actually going to look like when we go into an item? Because currently, if we go to the request table, we go new request, there's nothing here because we haven't designed this yet. and we can't click on, and if there was an item there, if we clicked into it, it wouldn't really show anything because there's no page definition. So what we can do, we're on the request table now, which automatically got added to the Explorer sidebar. If I want to go straight into this table from Explorer, because we're in Explorer right now, I can just press on the design button up here, and it will take me straight into the designer of the request table. So this is what the view we were in before, which is the columns view. Now we want to go into the design view. And so now this is a thing that confuses quite a few people. When we're editing this, which is requests, that's when we're looking at the list for requests, because we can change the default views. We can change it from a data table to another component. We can change quite a bit of that. But if we want to change the actual request item when you actually open the item, that's under request. So we can change it from requests to request. And now we're changing what appears on the individual request item. And so there are these. So by default, you have the activity field here, activity feed, and you've also got a form that's already there. And so what we can do is we can use this button, add all request columns, which will add all the non-system columns straight to this form here. I actually don't like the standard layout. I like to change it and give it a bit more space. So I like to put a bit of a space between the activity feed and this form here. And then I generally also like to add a label. So if I want to add a label to this form, I can hover over it. It says form. I can press the plus button. I can add a label. Now that label, it's gone somewhere. It's actually gone off the screen because the form doesn't go down far enough, because this over here controls the size of the form. So if I want to find that label, I can pull this down and we can see all those other fields we created appearing. I dragged it down far enough. Now the label's appearing, and I can just say request details for the label. Obviously, we don't want the label at the bottom of the form. We probably want it at the top. So I can click on the label word and I can drag this where I want, and I can scroll while dragging it. So that's quite handy. Now we want that up the top. The next thing is, we probably don't want them all taking up so much space. So we can do first name, last name like this, full name. We can probably put that underneath. And we don't want full name to show on the create page. And what that means is when we create a new request item, we don't want this because this is system generated. We're not expecting someone to interact with this field and type in the full name, because that's generated from the first name and the last name. So when we hover over this is a read-only column. We can actually press on this button, which is disable on create page, which means it won't appear on the create page. Next, we've got email, then we've got description. So maybe email, we can do half size, description, that looks nice there. How that is, additional details, that's fine. Request number, we can probably do that half width, put that next to email. Status, we can probably do that half width. And then the title, we can put at the top as well. And so you can sort of neaten this up however you'd want to. And just because I don't want it to be uneven there, I'm just going to save it like this. And so then now that's saved this page. Now, if I want to edit what's appearing on the create screen, I can press create screen. And so this is all, as you can see, there's overlapping between the activity feed and all the other items. And that's because this form only extends to here, but its fields extend further. So there's a bit of overlapping between the size of the form and the amount of fields that are crammed into the form. So we can just make the form a bit bigger. And now we can see it's pushing down the activity feed below it. The activity feed won't display on the create screen, so we can leave that one as it is. And then these request details, we probably want to put that up the top of this form and then just tidy this up a little bit. So again, first name and last name, we can shrink down a little bit. Full name, we can put this right down to the bottom, because although it won't, if we leave it here, it won't show up on the create screen. The blank space will still be there. So we just put it down to the bottom of the form. So the blank space is now at the bottom. The title, we don't want that to show up either because that's system generated. The status, probably not on creation, because the status, you're going to expect that to be updated after creation, and you just want all of them on creation to be a status of new. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So the default status is new. The request number, that's a read-only column, so we can hide that on creation. And then we also want the additional details, the description, the email, first name, last name. Now, we can also make some required fields. So we probably want the first name to be required. So I'm just going to toggle the required, and the last name to be required. So toggle that one. Email can be required. Description can be required. And then additional details, maybe that's optional because they're able to describe it all just in the initial description. And then what I'll do so that we don't get a whole bunch of space is I'm actually going to put the form so it only, so now the form item, I've just dragged it so that the form only is the size of the fields that are showing. So now if I save that, that's all saved. And then we can actually, sorry, one more thing. If I go back to the details page and go to the status. Oh no, that's going to be in the column because we want it. So if I go to status here and I go choice, we want the default value to be new. So when you create a new one, it does the choice as new. So I've just changed that by going back to the column. I can save that. And that was just in columns. So now let's go to the page and we can see now if we create a new request, our form is there. This is the create screen. So this is the last thing we did. So now we can do a first name that's already put in. So Jimmy Barnes, automation at Demo Rapid, a description. I was unable to log in to the system. And then maybe want some additional details. These are the additional details. And then we can create and open this item. And we can see because we set the default status to new, it automatically puts new as the status. And we can also see that the title's successfully generated in that it shows all the zeros and a 1. And it also shows the description in the title. It also got his full name, so Jimmy Barnes, so it concatenated the first and last name. And then we also got the request number over here. Obviously, I just whipped this up quickly, so it means that you guys can it's probably better ways to design the look and feel of this, but this is just to illustrate what is possible. So that's created. Do you guys have any questions before I move on to the next section?
No, that'll make sense. Stage.
Cool. Awesome. So what we can do now is I actually want to edit this page a little bit more. Actually, have you guys seen this, the timeline? Have you guys used or seen this before?
No.
You saw it in the initial demo, I think.
Yeah. Weeks and weeks ago when we had our first one, maybe.
Yeah, okay. So this timeline is quite useful, especially for an item like requests, because I can say, like I looked into this issue, more investigation needed. And then if we push that in, it will then add it to the timeline. And then it shows whoever the user is. My user I'm logged in as is called automation. But if it's my normal user, it will say Tristan. And so you can see just a record of it all. It also shows like system created fields and anytime it's updated, and you can change the default of that. So at the moment, we can hide all the system ones and we can hide item updates and we can hide creation. And so all the system ones won't appear there anymore. Or you can have everything showing, so every single time that this item. So if we change, for example, from status new to reviewed and save and close that, then open it again, double click it, we can see that the column status was changed from new to reviewed. But we might not want to see all that, but that's just, it's up to you guys how much information you want it to show. All right, so the next thing was to do the pipeline component. So for anything with a choice field, you can add to the form a pipeline. And so this is quite useful for, there we go, pipeline choice. So this is quite useful. Just any sort of statuses that are in a sequential order. Obviously, this one does follow some sort of sequence because it goes new, reviewed, and progress, resolved is the general sequence. So then what we can do is we can actually configure this to the status. And then because cancel doesn't really follow the sequence, we can actually exclude that and then just hit save, save. And now if we go into the item, we can see that there's a pipeline there, new, reviewed, in progress, resolved, and the colors came from these same colors over here. And that's just something else you can add. So we've done all of that. What's the next one? Show how to configure a tab layout. So the next thing I wanted to do was show you how to set up a Kanban board. So maybe you want to manage your different requests across a Kanban board. But then it would be nice if rather than having to go requests over here, so let's just save that. Because the reason it's asking for a save is because I changed the status on the pipeline. So and then having another item here called requests Kanban, it'd be nice if I just had a request home and then I had different tabs over here for each of the pages. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that now. So if I go into Designer, and then from Designer, I go Pages, All Pages, and I can create a page, and I can call this page Requests Home, Create Page. And I can add a layout, and then in the layout, we can go tab strip. And then this first one can be requests, and we can add that one. And then the next one, so this is automatically, is it knows, is I've linked it to the table, it automatically grabs the page definition from that table, and then it automatically grabs all the defaults there. So it's just put in the data table here for requests. And then I want my Kanban board to be over here. So I can then connect this to requests, but then the page name, I have to name it something else. Otherwise, it's just going to be exactly the same as this request one. And I'm just going to call it requests board, and the tab name, which is what appears over here, I'm just going to call that one board, and I can click add. Great. Now, if I click back to this one, it says the request board page does not exist, which makes sense because we're referencing a page that does not exist. So we can create that. So it's created it now, and we can add a layout. And the layout that we want to add is going to be the board component. And then what we can do is we can configure it to the requests table. We can configure the category to status. We don't want to show unspecified because none of them should be unspecified because we've got a default choice of new, but we do want to show new, reviewed, in progress, resolved, and canceled. The title is going to be title, the user column. This is one thing that I forgot to add is the user column. So every board needs to have a user column. And essentially what that is who's responsible for that particular item. And it also needs a date column. So over here, what I can do is I can create a date column and a user column quickly. So if I go back to, and we can just save this. So this is going to be saved, but this is just not completely configured. So we go back to tables, all tables, requests, columns, create column. And then this one can be user, and the column type is going to be user. And that's it. So the user responsible for resolving the request. So we can save that one. And then we also need a date column. So completed date. Maybe when the request was completed. So this one, I'm just going to select date and time. Or we can do date. I'm just going to do date and time for now. And so the date and time the request was completed. Save. And then I can quickly add these to this form over here. So that was the user, and it was also the completed date. Add to form. And that just adds them in. Pretty sure it's alphabetical order, so that's why they sort of appeared halfway up. And we can add them there. And then both of these, we don't actually need these on the creation screen. So I'm just taking them off the creation screen. If I go quickly back to the create screen, and then I can drag these to the bottom of the form here, and we can put user down here. And we just want to drag it underneath additional details. There we go. Completed date. Cool. And then we can drag this one back up. Oh, and we do want to show additional details, so we can save that. Cool. So we go back into the item. Great. And now what we can do, we need to go back to that page we were just editing with the Kanban. So if we go to pages and then all pages, it actually shows us our requests home and our request board. So these are the two we've just created. So if I go request home, and then if I go over to board, this is where we were just before. And if I edit this, And then, so title's title, user column is user, and then date column is completed date. And then we can save that and then save this. And then what this is going to show is if we go over here, so pressing the home button now takes us to request home, and request home is now got the request table, and on the other tab it's got a board. And so this shows all the different requests, and we can change the status easily, but just by dragging it between the different columns. And then once you finish dragging it, you just have to save it at the end. So that's save that item now. But the thing is, there's no way actually to access request home at the moment. So if I just go here, how do I access request home? If I press on requests, it just takes us to the request table, not to request home. So what I'll show you guys is how to configure this sidebar so that you can configure it however you like to. So in this case, we go back to designer, then we go menus. And then because we're configuring the Explorer sidebar, we can click on the Explorer button there. And then we don't actually care about this because this request item was the one that was on the bottom left. We don't care about this one because we want it to go directly to request home, not to request anymore. So we can edit it and call this one request home. And then what we can do is change the page and just give it the same name as the other page. So now it's referencing a different page, so request home down the bottom. And then if I hit save, that will save it. And then if I go back to Explorer and click on request home, it now goes to, request home instead of requests. And you can see that in the URL as well. So it's going to this page instead of just requests. All right, so that's a tab layout. That's a Kanban board. And then let's edit this because this does not look very good. So we can edit this as well. And so the way you can edit it is you can press the pencil icon. As you can see, our title's in bold, and the title's the one where you can click straight onto it and it'll open the item. And what we can do is we can drag that to the front because that makes more sense and we can give it a bit more room. Now, the other thing is we've got first name, last name, and full name. We don't need all of those on this view. So I might click tick here and just get rid of first name and last name because we just want the full name. So I can edit the view by clicking. So this pencil icon's is just moving the columns around and changing the side. This one edits the view, so you can change which columns are actually showing. So I'm going to get rid of first name and last name, so we just have full name. We probably don't need email. We don't need description because description is on the title already. Request numbers on the title. We might want status. We might want user, and we might want completed date. So we can save that one, and then we can drag these around so they make a bit more. So they got a bit more room. And there we go.
Is the viewer user specific setting?
No. So the view, if you change this all view, it will change it for all users, but you can create multiple views. So for example, if you want to create a view that does show, maybe for some reason you want to look at the email, you can, for example, go over here, add the email column. And we can call this one email view. And then we can save this one. And now the email view shows the email column, but the all view just shows it without that one. So if people want to create views that they want for themselves, they can just create one, but the view will be accessible to for all the users. You can also lock views. So you can lock this view so that users can't actually edit that view, just in case you guys want to, keep it strict and you've got a view that you don't want people fiddling around with. And you can actually change the views. Sorry, what was that?
Sorry, I was just going to mention that there's one other thing that you can do in the views that's probably useful to you guys, which is make them dynamic to the user that's actually using it. So there are a few keywords that you can use that will essentially take the context of the user that's logged in. And in this case, for example, just show them their tickets that they're responsible for. So even though it's still the same view, you would use an OData filter to essentially say that I just want my tickets or the ones that are assigned to me and my group. So even though it's one view, you don't have to create one for, all 50 of your people.
Perfect.
Yeah, and that's what this one over here shows. So the example OData filter they put in there is assigned to equals @me. In this case, if we wanted to only show the requests that have a user, that is the user who's currently logged in, you wouldn't do assign to because the column's not called that. The column's called user. So you'd go user is equal to @me, and that will look at whoever's currently logged in and just show the tickets associated with them. And the other thing is you can add rules to the view. So if we edit this view and say we only want to see live tickets, then we can actually add a rule here. So if we go over here and we say that status, and we want to show everything where the status is not equal to resolved, because resolved means it's closed now. And we also want to show where status is not equal to cancelled. Then we save that one. Now, if we change this ticket to resolved, save and close, it's not appearing in the list because the view is only showing live tickets.